economy. What you have in the background picture is the currency of the United Kingdom. But lying within the middle of that currency is the question that we intend to answer today. Let's take a look at it. The United Kingdom economy, is it heading towards a triple dip recession? Can we avoid the recession? This is the question that we intend to answer. And to help us answer this question, we're going to listen to a few words of a character that has played a very prominent role in determining whether we're going to experience a recession or not.
I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Right Honourable George Osborne.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a budget for people who aspire to work hard and get on. It's a budget for people who realise there are no easy answers.
That was George Osborne presenting the 2013 budget. And he was saying that it's a budget for people who realise that there are no easy answers. Unfortunately, we can't listen to everything that he said, but he did go on further to say that the problem was created by his predecessors, those who were in government prior to him. Now, before we further take a look, let's have a brief understanding of a few definitions which would serve to lead us into what we're talking about today. Now, a recession. What is a recession? A recession is when we have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. 2 consecutive quarters. And what is a quarter? A quarter is a period of 3 months. So for a recession to occur, we're looking at 6 months in a row of negative GDP figures. Then what is a triple dip recession? When we have 2 consecutive quarters twice within a period, that is when it's referred to as a triple dip recession. So you have 6 months of negative GDP, then later on another 6 months, that's 2 quarters consecutively, and yet another one. Then it is referred to as a triple dip recession. While the GDP is the value money-wise of the total sum of products and services within a country within a specific period of time. Now let's look at the background of the question we're trying to answer, the triple dip recession. Now, the recession first of all started in the second quarter of 2008, because if you take a look at the diagram, I'll bring it forward for us to see, we can see that from 2008, this is the first quarter. Okay, it's not as bright on the screen, but you can see that the recession started in the second quarter of 2008. And you will agree with me that this is more than 2 consecutive negative GDP figures. In 2009, the economy bounced back a little until around 2010, the second quarter experienced a negative GDP growth. Now, the fact that the GDP figures were positive in 2009 does not mean overall that the economy was back, because around 2009, as we'll see later on, that was when the credit crunch started. Now, but the fact that this was just for a quarter in 2010, the last quarter actually, it was just 1 quarter, it was not referred to as a recession. Then moving on to 2011, we can see from the 4th quarter, the GDP figures were negative again. That was 3 times consecutively, which amounts to recession. Then in 2012, back to positive figures until the last quarter of 2012. Now, since the last quarter of 2012, the GDP figures were negative. The question is, if we have negative GDP growth for the first quarter of 2013, which is from January to March 2013, then it's a recession. And then we have recorded a triple-dip recession. We'll still go ahead to answer that question. But technically, what we've been told is that the figure is around 0.1%. So technically, we may have avoided a triple-dip recession. Now, what we have here is a number of graphs showing what we've explained. The first one is just a line graph showing how the economy is nearing a triple-dip recession. We can see the fluctuations. Then, secondly, we can see it represented in the bar chart format. We can see it starts from 1997 and goes on to 2007. Then, finally, we have it represented with a trend graph. Actually, from 1997 to 2007, we saw the economy go up in terms of GDP growth. It was in 2007, actually, that the bubble burst. That was when the downward trend started. And first of all, we saw a 7% downturn. That was in 2007 and 2008. Then in 2009, there was a further 3% drop. That was when the government had problems with the banks. They had to start trying to bail out the banks. That was when we had the credit crunch. And ever since then, it has more or less been a flatline kind of economy. And as we said, we are somewhere around here, 2013, where we are looking at the possibility of another recession occurring, leading to a triple-dip recession. Now, the next question is, who is responsible for the present situation? Is it this woman?
Labour want to renationalise electricity and water and British telecoms. They want to take power back to the state, back into their own grasp.
That's Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain from 1979. Some are saying that it is her that's responsible for the problems that we're facing today. Or is it this man?
Privilege of leading you these past 12 years. Thank you.
That is Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain on the ticket of Labour after we've had the Conservatives in power for quite a while. Some believe that he is responsible for the problems that we are facing. Or finally, is it this man?
The changes to the climate change levy, but he still hasn't addressed the real problem. It's a tax on energy, not a charge on carbon. And
that is David Cameron, as we all know, the present Prime Minister of Great Britain. There he was criticising the person that he took over from, Gordon Brown. Okay, now let's now take a look at these leaders one by one. Margaret Thatcher. As we said, Margaret Thatcher came into power in 1979. She was there for 11 years. She came in on the ticket of the Conservatives. Now, what was Margaret Thatcher's ideology? Margaret Thatcher believed in a sort of libertarian ideology kind of government. She was positive in terms of the supply-sided kind of economy. I mean, her policies were inclined towards supply-sided stuff. She believed that only industries and companies that were viably profitable were those that the government should back up. So the first thing that she did was more or less a surgical operation on industries that she felt were not actually producing to the GDP or the economic growth of the country. That led to massive unemployment because a lot of industries were closed down, and which equally led to riots and strikes by those who lost their jobs. But Thatcher believed in comparative advantage, the belief that a country should only dwell on what they consider to be their strength, what is economically viable. So this is why she looked at companies and industries that she felt were ailing, and she closed them down. She also fought against trade union. That led to a lot of opposition from workers. In fact, there was a miners' strike then that readily comes to mind. and she believed that despite the fact that we were affiliated or were members of EU, the EU should not supersede the sovereignty of Britain. Thatcher was succeeded by John Major. John Major came in 1990. He was more or less a centrist. He didn't really rock the boat, so to say. So things were more or less the same for those 7 years. But thereafter, Tony Blair came into power. We all know Tony Blair came in on the ticket of Labour. He was there for 10 years. Tony Blair was strong in terms of his military intervention in the affairs of other countries. So we all know about what happened in Afghanistan, where so much of the government efforts and money was pumped towards bringing about a settlement in the crisis that they were going through. He believed in a liberal market, and he supported, setting up a sort of economy where business could thrive. He believed in a free market, so to say, a democratic nation state. He supported, similar to Thatcher, the weakening of the unions, but he was not as strong-fisted as her. She went by the name then, the Iron Lady, and he did insist that we should remain in the EU. From Tony Blair, his then Chancellor, Gordon Brown, took over. Gordon Brown embarked upon massive spending. He lowered the taxes and he supported immigration. Then the economy was open. He believed that taking care of the needs of people was a paramount must of the government. So a lot of spending was embarked upon. Then finally in 2010, which is what we have till present, the Conservatives took over and formed a coalition government with David Cameron in power. Now, they took a look at what happened during the era of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and they reached the conclusion that too much money had been spent. They cut down spending, cut down borrowing, and sought to establish a strong private sector. David Cameron has been of the belief that the health sector, for instance, the NHS, has taken up too much of the government's spending, and that it should now be in the hands of the private sector, because the government can't just continue throwing away money, spending money on what is not economically viable. So we've seen a lot of these things happening. We saw the hike in the student fares. We saw him shift from a physical to monetary policy, which we'll take a look as we move on. Now, the next question is, how did we get here? If we take a look at the time frame, we'll see from 1997 to 2007, when we had Tony Blair in power, we saw massive economic growth. There was money in society. Then you could obtain a mortgage, 120%. So in other words, you're getting 20% in excess of what you are actually requesting for. The world economy was equally growing. There was a lot of public spending and there was a lot of borrowing. So despite the fact that the economy was growing, if we take a look at the public sector cash net requirement, we'll notice that then it was negative. The government was paying off our loans, but at the same time they were borrowing money, which to an extent has spiraled or gathered momentum to the present crisis that we are going through. Then, as we know, the government was procuring the Afghanistan war. A lot of money was being spent on the military. By 2007, the economic crisis set in, as we said earlier on. In addition to the fact that there were bank problems and the credit crunch, people obtained loans which they hardly paid back. Those were referred to as poisonous loans, and the government had to bail out the banks. So by 2009, it was as if everything crumbled. We had the credit crunch, we had a 3% plunge in the economy, and people even had to put down a deposit of 40% to get a mortgage. It was that bad. Now, what's the present situation? If we look at the background that we've examined, presently there hasn't really been any growth GDP-wide. No expansion, no investment. According to experts, the economy is back to the situation or the position it was in 1992. Imagine how bad it is. In October to December alone 2012, for that quarter, the economy shrank by 3%, showing that even within such a short period, how things have gone down. Now, presently, the economy is 3.5% below its peak in the past, and experts say it will take at least 2 years before it recovers, gets back to, its previous position. So this, according to the experts, is the worst recovery Britain has experienced in the past 100 years. That's what the present situation is. And if we take a look at a few facts and figures, in terms of real terms, how it affects the pocket of the man on the street is 1.4% in favor of inflation, because while inflation grew by 2.7, the earnings went up by 1.4. So that's a difference of 1.2% or 1.3% in favor of inflation. Then we've also looked at the unemployment figures. The unemployment figures is still between around 8.5 to 8.6%. There's 2.5 million people unemployed, and 1 million of those are youth. That's not even to talk about those that have part-time jobs. So the government really has a lot. Another problem that there is the issue of interest rate. It's at an all-time low of 2.5%, which is not what was obtainable in the past. Now let's look at a few solutions. Now, we have the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. The fiscal policy is when the government pumps money in a particular area or sector with the hope that it will have a ripple effect on neighboring areas. We saw that happen during the Olympics when a lot of money was pumped into Stratford. They built the stadium, and the neighboring areas experienced a positive economic growth. This is referred to as the Keynesian multiplier effect, where the government targets a particular place, puts money in with the hope that that money will increase the circular flow of money. There will be more money in the economy which goes round, and the economy will experience positive growth because people are encouraged to spend. The government has put money into the economy. On the other hand, we have the monetary policy. The monetary policy is when the government tinkers with the interest rates. They either lower or increase the interest rates to try to take care of the economy and to prevent inflation. When they notice that there's too much money, they increase the interest rates so that people will save money in order to get more interest, and the amount of money in the economy is reduced substantially. Then finally, we've got quantitative easing, which is presently what the Bank of England is taking a look at, where the bank is producing money, printing money, and also buying financial instruments. So the idea of producing money is to ensure that at least the banks are willing to give out loans, because the Bank of England supports them financially. So all of these have been tinkered with. But unfortunately for David Cameron's government, they are claiming that there is no money. As we see, as we go on, there's a budget deficit. So they can't really embark upon the fiscal policy. It's only the monetary policy where they're tinkering with the interest rates. And as we will see, the interest rate is at an all-time low. So people are not being encouraged to save, because if you put money in the bank, how much are you going to get back in interest? So that is virtually the only approach they have out of the two policies. Then the quantitative easing is also going on, but printing money without something to back it up at times could be dangerous. Now, if we take a look at the government spending, the main issue has been healthcare, 124 billion. And like I said, David Cameron is of the opinion that the NHS should be privatized. you know, that the government can't continue pumping in money. If we take a look at this pie chart, we can see that health has been the main issue after pensions. Pensions has been 129 billion, and these are all current expenditure, not capital. You know, capital like the Olympics, things that the government can actually state that this is what we did and this is what we've got to show for it.
Is it
now,
it's by what? Billion pounds or billion?
Yeah, billion pounds.
Billion pounds.
Yeah, billion. Now, this is a bigger look at, you know, the government spending for the fiscal year 2012. And if we take a look at what we have in the center there, we'll notice that what came in within the fiscal year for 2012 is 592 billion, while the outgoing, what the government spent, is 683 billion. By my calculation, that's the difference of 91 billion deficit. So in other words, the government has spent more than what it earned within the fiscal year. So what will we say the future holds? You know, like we said, we noticed that when Gordon Brown took over, you know, what they were doing is that even though they were earning money, they embarked so much on spending that at the end of the day, the public cash next requirement from negative became positive until in 2012 we were talking about over 100 billion required just to ensure that the money the government, that was needed in the public sector was not, that was how much the government had to pump into the public sector to keep the economy going. So if we take a look at the future now, if we remember what we were told during the 2012 budget by George Osborne, one of the palliative measures he put in place was a beer tax. Earlier on, he has said it was going to be increased by 3p, but what he did is that he reduced it by 1p. The idea was more or less ahead of the 2015 election to ensure that the masses were placated and, you know, people don't get angry. Another thing that was introduced during 2012, which I believe we'll see more of in the future, was the help to buy scheme that George Osborne put in place, which is more or less an amendment to the right to buy. Right to buy was in the past. The help to buy would see individuals who want to buy houses deposit 5%, and the government will provide a 20% interest-free loan. So if you want to buy a house, you're a first-time buyer, you put down 5%, you get 20% loan from the government, interest-free, and then the government was also going to back up the banks, so the banks would not be losing, and so that the banks would be encouraged. Then the government is equally saying, rather than 2015, which is what they predicted earlier on, by 2017, these austerity measures, you know, no borrowing, no, in fact, some of the sectors have been asked not to embark upon spending. You know, there's been a ban placed upon, you know, heavy spending in certain sectors just to ensure that we have austerity measures in place until this crisis is over. So by 2017, we expect to see Britain back on its feet, and by 2018, exactly 10 years after the economic crisis, we hope to be back, you know, out of the woods and seeing things positively. So, in conclusion, the government needs to strike a balance between the application of fiscal and monetary policies. The mistake the likes of Gordon Brown made is that they were too heavy-sided on just one of them. When there was too much money in the economy, they should have increased the interest rates, so that would have encouraged people to put money in the bank, and it would have brought down the possibility of inflation, because there wouldn't have been too much money, but they allowed it to go on and on and on until the bubble burst. Also, to ensure the circular flow of income, the government should try to ensure that people are at rest. When David Cameron came in, one of the things that he did, and I consider a mistake, he spoke about immigrants being too much, and there was a clampdown on immigrants. A lot of people ran out of the country, sent money back to probably Africa or wherever they were from, especially these illegal immigrants. So that to an extent affected the economy. People need that stability. Where they are of the opinion that everything is okay, they are not going to be in trouble. And also the present low interest rate should be reviewed. The interest rate is so low, it is not realistic. These are the things that I personally believe will help our economy. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.